And welcome to the hot seat. I hope it's not too hot now. Tom Morris, the artistic director of this festival and for 16 years now. Tom, I almost feel like you've been put in this position so many times this weekend. I almost feel guilty about grilling you once again. And I have to say, I don't know whether you at home saw this, but the tribute that Barbara paid earlier after Facade was just so deep, so endearing, and so heartfelt, and so indicative of the way that people talk about you and feel about you in this hallowed space. So thank you for taking the time out to talk one more time. And I want to just literally wind the clock back to where it all started, to how you came into this situation in the first place.
Yeah, it was a lucky situation because I, having spent 35 years with these two wonderful, large organizations that I ran, I always knew that I would not end my career in the orchestra world.
Okay.
I didn't know what that meant. But after you've run the Boston Symphony and the Cleveland Orchestra, it's hard to think of what else in the orchestra world to do.
Yeah.
And to be honest, after that long period of time, it was wonderful. But I was developing a bit of restlessness.
Sure.
Musical restlessness,
of course,
amongst other things. And I actually told the Cleveland Orchestra board president in, I think it was 2001, something like that. This is after we had announced a new music director. We'd raised a huge amount of money. We'd renovated Severance Hall.
At the time, was that Franz Welser coming in?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. And we were about to celebrate the transition from Christoph and Dochnani to Franz Welser. And I said, I just want you to know that on my 60th birthday, which was in February of 2004, that I was going to relinquish the position.
Okay.
So they had 3 years' notice.
Sure.
The board chair did. No one else knew. It was a closely held secret.
Okay.
And we actually didn't end up announcing my departure until I think it was July 2003, when they simultaneously announced my successor. So
Okay.
it was one announcement, which is, I think, the way you should manage transition.
Sure.
But I was approached in the early 2000s by the Ojai Music Festival to what I consider being artistic director. And at first I sort of was bemused. But I thought, what drives me is music.
Right, exactly.
And I was always very active in the artistic planning in the orchestra world. But I'd never been in charge, publicly in charge of the artistic product. So my line that I've used is I crossed from the dark side of management to the creative and bright side of artistic.
But it's worth reminding viewers too that you started out as a musician, or I mean, at the very least, as we both did, we both started out as percussionists. So we stand near musicians.
Oh yeah, yeah. But I never earned a living as a percussion player. I earned a lot of money as a percussion player, but I never did that as a career.
Point taken.
But I kept my hand in it. So being close to music was essential. And anyway, as it developed, I was offered this job, and I accepted. Now, I knew that actually I'd be free of the Cleveland Orchestra at that point. They didn't know that. They were willing for me to do both simultaneously.
Okay.
And when they asked me about that, I said, well, I can do that, I said, biting my tongue. And so it was, it just sort of happened. And when I ended my Cleveland Orchestra days, which was in March 1st, 2004, my first festival here was June 2004, which I'd been planning, for 2 years before that.
Okay.
And I honestly think it took me a couple years to really understand this, to get to know this place, to get to feel the spaces, and to begin to understand what the possibilities were.
So it was the prospect of the job itself and coming to the creative side and being able to be involved with
Correct.
that initially drew you here.
Correct.
And then you came to know the Ojai community and all that it
Although
offers.
I'd been here, I actually heard about the Ojai Music Festival for the first time in 1969 when I went to Boston from a young gentleman who started at the same time as assistant conductor named Michael Tilson Thomas.
Oh, that guy.
Yeah, that's right. So I'd heard about it through all these years, and I didn't come here for the first time until 1996, and then I was here, fairly regularly. I got hooked on it, and I didn't arrive with any grand vision or plan other than this seems sort of interesting. I liked the compact nature of it. I liked the fact that it was not an orchestral festival and was not going to be an orchestral festival, which put me into a world of music that I really hadn't had much experience with. I knew I'm an omnivore when it comes to music.
Right.
But I know the orchestral repertoire upside down, backwards, and sideways. There's very few people can say they've actually heard all 9 Glazunov symphonies.
Gesundheit.
But the center of this repertoire was new to me.
Okay.
And the fact that the largest orchestral ensemble you can really fit on the stage is something in the order of 50, 55. So I had to learn, and I had to, and I've always hung around with composers and creative people, and it started to dawn on me that this would be a very nice playground.
Okay.
So the first person I actually selected, my first music director here was Kent Nagano, that I inherited from my predecessor Ernest Fleischman. Same way that Chad Smith is inheriting Matthias Pincher from me. You just have to do that from a scheduling standpoint. But the first appointment I made as music director in 2005 was Oliver Nussin.
Oliver Nussin.
Yeah. And as I've said this weekend, Ollie is a very dear friend of mine, and so it seemed sort of natural. And then a month before the festival, Ollie was taken very, very ill, and he had to cancel. So he never made it here.
Right.
But we did do a festival that he and I had planned.
Right.
And then it was in 2006, I hired Robert Spano, also, again, somebody who I knew and respected. And he represented to me sort of a new breed of conductor, younger generation, who had an affinity for a much different repertoire than was in the history of this place, and that appealed to me. And so that was a festival that dealt very heavily with the music of Osvaldo Golijov.
Of course, of course.
Which was a shock to Ojai, which was used to Boulez, Stravinsky, Messiaen, very mainstream European. Even though they had done all kinds of things, but that was the center of it.
Right.
And it gradually, as it went on from there, I realized that there really didn't have to be any barriers. The only limitation is really imagination. And imagination is something that sort of gushes out of me.
Sure.
So it then, it started to develop a rhythm. And it was very much, I have to say, as I look back on it, it's very much a give and take. I called my Ojai experience the other day probably the most wonderful sort of postdoctorate education you can imagine.
That's right.
Because I got to choose my own teachers.
Right.
These remarkable artists. So I sort of look at it that it was something that, I was imposing my thoughts on it, but I was at the same time feeding off of what it was giving back, and so this great sort of loop, it's almost like a gigantic flywheel, started revolving, and picking up momentum.
I dare say that I can't imagine you would ever be the one to say this, so I'm going to say it for you. Then the rest of the world looks in and sees what happens when somebody takes a risk like appointing as a music director Mark Morris or Peter Sellers or Eighth Blackbird. All of those things proved themselves wildly viable and then some, but they hadn't been tried.
Well, and I think the other thing that was in my mind, I have to say, when I took this, was I was the first person to do this job who was not from Los Angeles.
Okay, interesting.
And I was a real foreigner. And I actually took that as a mandate to basically not position in my mind and in the planning and in the thinking about Ojai, Southern California, but in fact, internationally, the world of music.
Right.
And so, that opened up enormous possibilities. And I think that in that context, it is in that context that you, in fact, can think about Mark Morris as a music director, or you can think about Eighth Blackbird as a music director. You can think about Leif Ove Ansnes as a music director, and on and on. Peter Sellers is quintessential Los Angeles, but sort of, not really.
Right, exactly.
And so it then just developed this, and I mean, I've kind of felt it. I've felt the centrifugal force of energy in this place.
Right.
And the centrifugal force in me as well. And how lucky is that?
Well, we are already, I'm getting hand signals that we're already running short on time, so I'm not going to be able to go through this entire list of things that I would love to talk to you about, which just means that we're going to have a phone call later. But
well, we'll do that.
Yeah, I want to ask you specifically about the Ojai audience and how you've found them to be receptive to all of these ideas, because everything that I've seen in my just 3 years here is that all of these things are embraced in a way that I really couldn't have envisioned.
Every single artist that comes to Ojai, every single one, without exception, makes a point of saying, I don't believe the audience here. This is an audience that is curious, it's interested, because we're in this gorgeous small community, artists and audience members run into each other in the coffee shop, on the street, in the park, or wherever. And the audience is not at all hesitant about asking questions, giving free advice and opinions. And I've always said very loudly that I actually think that the audience is as important a part of this festival as the performers. In fact, there's no boundary at all between artists and audience.
Right.
The facilities are not formal, and there's just this constant interaction. And when we do concerts in other venues, which are different kinds of setups with the audience around or the audience within or whatever it is, it just further mixes that all up. Every single rehearsal we do is open to the public here. We just, why not?
It's just brilliant. So watching people sitting even outside the arch, people are sitting there listening in, and then here on the grass we've got people who are just really hanging on everything, and you have these beautiful digital monitors back there now, subtitles and great sound, and then just this sort of core constituency down here that just hangs on all of it. It's really inspiring.
Absolutely, and I think I say what I've learned is that one of the secrets, music does not exist in a vacuum, or pieces don't exist in a vacuum. If you go to most concerts anywhere else, you'll go on a Thursday night to a concert, and you will hear 2 hours of music, and you'll hear 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces, period, and then you'll go away, and then a month later, or whatever it is, you'll come back and hear another concert. But your brain does not relate the two.
Right.
The festival concept, which is what we do, is this concentrated, packed period with all this stuff going on, over 25 events. And as you know, the public here are gluttons for everything. And so everyone likes to go to as much as they can. There are a lot of people who go to absolutely everything.
Right.
And
including the talks and the films and everything else that you've added to the concerts.
And the result is that they are, by definition, relating everything to everything.
That's right.
So it's context, built-in context that forces you to listen to a piece and not to come to a judgment of whether you like it or don't like it, but, well, what did you think in relation to something else and why? And when you hear music in that context, where it's not a binary yes/no decision, minds get opened.
What would you say, if there is even a concise answer to this, after 16 seasons of working with this festival, what's the foremost thing that you've learned and taken on board for yourself?
Total fearlessness. Complete and utter fear. And it's not just about repertoire, but do not be constrained by anything. I mean, you know, there are lots and lots of variables in putting on a performance. There's the time of the concert, there's the length of the concert, there's the place of the concert, it's how you produce the concert, it's how the concert looks, what the repertoire is. You know, we hardly do any concerts, as you know, that's one performer. Everything's mixed up. We've done away with intermissions. So we can think about two-part concerts, which each are on their own. And we're just, what I've learned is the more you are willing to rethink all those conventions and use them all towards the goal of serving the music, which is happening, and also do the music at the highest level. We pride ourselves here that we do not slap a performance together and just get through it. It's well rehearsed, well produced, and that in its own is something that is not the norm.
Nobody here is in any danger of forgetting you, but I have to ask, is there a next step? Where do you go from here?
We'll see. There will be. Maybe more than one. Who knows? I'm too naturally curious.
Yeah, and certainly too young to think about stopping.
Oh, I've got 6 careers left, I think. I don't know, whatever it is.
Well, thank you so much for coming to talk, Tom.
Thanks,
This has been a pleasure each and every year, and I wish you only the best, and I know that we'll continue talking in the years to come.
We will, and thank you for being a part of it as well. And my colleague on the marimba in NC.
Absolutely. We will always have that gong. Thank you very much.
Thanks.